Hello, seventh graders. This is Mr. Shear, and we're going to continue on today with our early expeditions of Washington's. And today we're looking at the George Vancouver expedition of 1792. So just a quick recap. We have 6 expeditions we're looking at as part of this unit. We've looked at Juan de Fuca, the sailor who may or may not have come here in 1590. James Cook, the most famous explorer to come here in 1776. Of course, Robert Gray was the first American to come here and discovered the Columbia River in 1792. Then we jumped ahead to the Astoria expedition. That's the one where everything went wrong in 1810. And today, we're looking at the George Vancouver expedition in 1792. So you'll notice Robert Gray and George Vancouver were here pretty much the same time. And this expedition today is most famous because it's probably the most impactful long-term to Washington, in that Vancouver went on to name over 200 features of our state. So just a little brief background about George Vancouver and the expedition itself. It's 2 boats, the HMS Discovery and the Chatham. And the HMS Discovery is the main boat, that's Vancouver's boat. A little bit about George Vancouver. He's British. He was born in 1757, so he's about 35 years old when he came to Washington. He'd actually worked in the British Navy since he was 13 years old and was on James Cook's boat in 1776. So this was his second trip to Washington, but his first as a captain. He, as far as the Pacific Northwest goes, went from Oregon all the way up to Alaska. He spent a long time in Alaska, and he named a lot up there as well. He was in Washington or off our coast for about 2 months in the summer of 1792, mostly June and July. And again, the biggest impact of this trip, which we're going to talk a lot about today and which your assignment deals with, is that he names 200 landmarks in Washington. So this is a map of the area where Vancouver was predominantly. And this is the U.S.-Canada border. You'll notice that it doesn't just make a straight line across, it actually cuts down, does some weird zigzags through the San Juan Islands. If you're in Canada, the same island chain there is called the Gulf Islands. So we have the San Juan Islands, but they're part of a larger chain, and the Canadians call their half the Gulf Islands. We actually split them in about half. And then the border zips down here around the big island of Vancouver Island, and that is the 40th largest island in the world. It's a really big island. Now, Vancouver, of course, as we'll talk about, names this island after himself. There's the city of Vancouver in both Canada, and then there's also Vancouver, Washington. But I just think it's interesting to look at this map and think that when we're in Conway, we are actually north of Victoria, British Columbia. We're north of parts of BC, even here in Conway. And then last thing I'll point out about this map is Vancouver spends a lot of time on Whidbey Island, which is where Oak Harbor is. And if you've ever gone to Deception Pass and you take that bridge, you're driving onto Whidbey Island. He spent a long time in that area as well and exploring what we now call Puget Sound. So I want to say a quick thing just about naming and discovery. Those 2 words. I use those words today, and I say things like George Vancouver discovered Mount Rainier. But just to be clear, the way I feel about it is it's kind of like if your friend discovered $100 in your wallet, you might think to yourself, no, you didn't discover that. I knew it was there. And then if your friend was like, actually, I'm going to rename it. I'm going to call it My 100. You might think, wait, don't. But that's kind of what this is. And my point is, it's not like people and Native Americans did not know that Mount Rainier existed or that Mount St. Helens existed. They knew it had, and they had had their own name for it for anywhere up to 8,000 years. Certain tribes can trace their ancestry back 3,500 years in Washington, which means that anywhere from 3 to 8 to 9,000 years, Mount Rainier was called Tahoma, which means Mother of Waters. And really, it's only been the last 228 years that we've called it Mount Rainier. So for most of its existence with humans, Mount Rainier had a different name. And I like to point that out because it's important to me. And if I was king of the world, I would love to change back all of our names in Washington to their Native American original names, just to be both historical and sensitive to the fact that lots of people lived here before the Europeans came. All right, but moving on. We're just going to briefly look at the timeline of his trip. It's a peaceful trip. It wasn't a very, it was not a violent trip. There's no exploding boats. There's no battles with natives. George Vancouver actually got along pretty well with just about everybody he encountered, both the Spanish boat captains and the Native Americans that were here. In April of 1792, his boat passes Robert Gray, who is leaving, and they exchange information, including the existence of the Columbia River. And Vancouver takes a smaller party of his boat, and in a small boat, he sends them up the Columbia River, where they name a bunch of things along the Columbia River, including Mount Hood, which is in Oregon. But they got to the Columbia River Gorge, and from there they could see Mount Hood, and they named it. Vancouver, on June 1st, makes his first mainland landing. So he lands in Washington, and he lands at a place that he'll name Birch Bay, near Bellingham. Birch Bay is also where the water slides are, where we typically go at Conway for your 8th grade field trip. But he names it Birch Bay. Probably about the only stressful drama really that makes note on Vancouver's trip is at one point he does run aground. He runs into some unforeseen underwater obstacle off Whidbey Island, and he loses an anchor. And it was just fun fact, recently found in 2016. So 1792, he loses this anchor, and they just pulled it out of the water. They think it belonged to Vancouver. So they just found an artifact from this trip. All right, on June 4th, 1792, he lands at Whidbey Island and officially claims all of the land that he's exploring, so all of Washington's coastline and islands he claims for England, and he names this land New George after the British king. For about 10 days, he takes a smaller party out and they explore the Salish Sea, and he ends up naming it Puget Sound. And one last big push in July before he leaves, he goes on a naming frenzy, and he names about 200 places in Washington, including Mount Baker and Mount St. Helens. Then he heads north to Alaska. He explores Vancouver Island, and he names it after himself, Vancouver Island. So again, he names this Vancouver Island after himself. He's mostly here where Oak Harbor is, on Whidbey Island. He sends a smaller crew down here to explore the Puget Sound. And he names a bunch of the mountains and features that he can see from the water. So what all does George Vancouver name? Really, that's the big impact of his 2 months here. Well, the list is extensive. But some of the bigger features, of course, you can see there: Mount St. Helens, Puget Sound, Vancouver Island, Mount Baker, Mount Rainier, Port Townsend. He names Hood Canal, Birch Bay, Whidbey Island, Vashon Island, Mount Hood, and about 190 more places. So we're going to talk about what your assignment is and what it involves. So this assignment is another slideshow, and it involves research. Don't get sad. Research isn't that bad. But you've got to make a slideshow on the following 5 geographical things that George Vancouver named: Mount Rainier, Mount St. Helens, Mount Baker, Puget Sound, and Whidbey Island. So, again, there's a title slide, and then there's these 5 slides. So it's going to be a 6 slideshow, and we're going to take a look at that now. So it looks like this. Again, you've got your title slide where you've got to put a picture in, and then I've given you a suggested name. Who did Vancouver name it after? You can modify that, but you need a background photo, and then you want to take all of this text and get rid of it. I did put some ideas down of what your background photo might be of George Vancouver, his boat, or a Washington landmark like Mount Rainier, Mount Baker, Puget Sound, something that he named. And then I've made you a slide template for each of the 5 things. I said this last time, but you do not have to follow the template. It's just there if you want to make it easy or easier on yourself. So let's look at Mount Rainier specifically. So this slide, what I want you to put onto each of your slideshows or slides is I want to know the feature you're talking about, which is listed, and then I want to know who it's named after, a little bit about the person it was named after, what was the Native American name for Mount Rainier in this case, and just a few little Mount Rainier facts. And then you need 2 pictures. One picture is of the geological feature. So in this case, one picture would be of Mount Rainier, and the other one would be of the person it's named after. So let's just do an example here. Mount Rainier, which I've told some of you guys, is named after Peter Rainier. So this is Mount Rainier. I've got that picture, and I've got a picture of Peter Rainier. And George Vancouver named it after his friend, Peter, who was not on the trip. So he's a friend of Vancouver's from the military. He actually never even came to Washington and never saw the mountain that was named after him. He actually fought against the United States in the Revolutionary War, and he's not even particularly a famous British soldier. The Native American name for Mount Rainier was Tahoma, and then the Mount Rainier facts that you might choose to include is it's the tallest mountain in Washington at 4,404 feet. So please note, when it says who was he in Mount Rainier facts, I don't need a lot of information. Right? Short information is fine. And I've told you guys this before, but I really feel strongly that I wish we could change the name back to Tahoma. I think that's a much classier name in the sense that it relates better to Washington, the mother of waters, because it's covered in glaciers. It also feeds many rivers, and it would tie into the Native American ancestry that we have in this state, whereas I think Peter Rainier looks a lot like Peter Griffith from the Family Guy and really just has no connection to our state. So it's something I feel pretty strongly about. So last thing I want to say is while you have to look up that information, and that's a little bit of research, like who each of these mountains was named after, or each of these features was named after, and you have to do some of that on your own, you have another option where you can just, come to the meet. And if you come to the meet, I'll be running through the slides. I'll do 2 the first day and 3 the second day. But on Tuesday, I'm going to do these 2 slides, Mount Rainier, Mount St. Helens, or something like that. And then on the next couple days, I'll get the ones that we hadn't finished. This is a 2-day assignment. So if you come to the meet, I will give you the research information you are looking for. And oh my gosh, you can just be happy. So if you come to the meet, I'll give you the information. You don't have to look it up. I think that's it, guys. Again, I want to reiterate, this is a 2-day assignment. So we're going to take 2 days this week to talk about these different features that were named by Vancouver. And please, as always, email me with questions. And thanks for watching the video.